Hello, how are you today? And are you ready to hear mysteries? If you're ready, I'll tell you.
The Northern Patrol. Sergeant Jackson and his team had been briefed about their upcoming mission, a week-long patrol in the dense, northern forests of America. The area was known for its rugged terrain, thick underbrush, and unsettling legends. They were tasked with scouting the region for any signs of illegal activity and ensuring the safety of the nearby towns. Before heading out, the team gathered their gear and supplies, ensuring they were well prepared for the challenging conditions. The night before their departure, they sat around the campfire, sharing stories they had heard about the forest. One of the soldiers, Private Miller, mentioned the legend of the Wendigo, a terrifying creature said to roam these woods, preying on those who ventured too far from the beaten path. At dawn, the team set off, their spirits high despite the ominous tales. The forest was beautiful, but foreboding, with tall trees that blocked out much of the sunlight, casting eerie shadows along their path. As they moved deeper into the woods, the sense of isolation grew, and the usual sounds of wildlife seemed to diminish, replaced by an unsettling silence. As they approached their first checkpoint, strange things began to happen. Private Thompson swore he saw a figure moving swiftly through the trees, but when the team investigated, they found nothing. Corporal Davis reported hearing faint whispers, though no one else could hear them. Dismissing these incidents as nerves, they pressed on. First night at camp. That evening, they reached their first designated camp area. The team set up their tents and started a fire, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over them. As night fell, the forest seemed to come alive with an eerie presence. Shadows danced around the campfire, and the wind howled through the trees, creating an almost supernatural symphony. During his watch, Sergeant Jackson heard what sounded like footsteps circling the camp. He strained his eyes, peering into the darkness, but saw nothing. Suddenly, a loud, blood-curdling scream echoed through the forest, sending chills down his spine. The team was on high alert, weapons ready, but the scream was not repeated, and they found no signs of intruders. The following day, the team continued their patrol, but the forest seemed to be closing in on them. They found strange symbols carved into trees and remnants of old campfires, long abandoned. Private Miller, who had mentioned the Wendigo, grew increasingly paranoid, convinced that they were being watched. As night approached, the team set up camp once more. This time, the tension was palpable. No one spoke much, each soldier lost in their thoughts and fears. That night, they experienced a series of disturbing events. They heard disembodied voices calling their names, saw ghostly figures flitting between the trees, and felt an oppressive sense of dread. Private Thompson vanished during his watch, his disappearance marked by another terrifying scream. The remaining soldiers searched frantically, but found no trace of him. The fear among the team reached a fever pitch, and they knew they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. By the second night, the soldiers were exhausted and terrified. They decided to set up a more fortified camp, hoping to deter whatever was stalking them. However, their efforts were in vain. As the moon rose, casting an eerie glow over the forest, they felt an overwhelming sense of doom. Suddenly, a grotesque figure emerged from the shadows of gaunt, emaciated creature with glowing eyes and an insatiable hunger in its gaze. It let out a guttural growl, sending the soldiers into a panic. They fired their weapons, but the creature seemed unfazed, moving with unnatural speed and agility. Only Sergeant Jackson and Corporal Davis managed to escape, fleeing through the forest as the creature pursued them. They stumbled upon an old cabin, seeking refuge inside. Barricading the door, they prayed for dawn to arrive quickly. The Northern Patrol, the second day. After their harrowing escape from the Wendigo, Sergeant Jackson and Corporal Davis were determined to return to base as quickly as possible. However, they knew they had to navigate through more of the dense forest to reach safety. Despite their fear and exhaustion, they pressed on, hoping to make it to the next designated checkpoint by nightfall. As they trekked through the forest, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The once beautiful woods now seemed sinister and menacing. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs set their nerves on edge. They moved cautiously, weapons at the ready, constantly scanning their surroundings for any signs of danger. Around midday, they came across an old, overgrown trail that wasn't on their map. Curious and desperate to find a quicker route, they decided to follow it. The trail led them deeper into the forest, where the trees grew even taller and thicker, blocking out much of the sunlight. It felt as if they were walking into the heart of darkness. As they continued, they noticed the air growing colder, and an unnatural fog began to roll in. Visibility dropped, and they found themselves in an eerie, silent world. Suddenly, they heard faint, ghostly whispers surrounding them. Jackson and Davis exchanged nervous glances, but pressed on, trying to ignore the unsettling sounds. Around midday, they came across an old, overgrown trail that wasn't on their map. Curious and desperate to find a quicker route, they decided to follow it. The trail led them deeper into the forest, where the trees grew even taller and thicker, blocking out much of the sunlight. It felt as if they were walking into the heart of darkness. As they continued, they noticed the air growing colder, and an unnatural fog began to roll in. Visibility dropped, and they found themselves in an eerie, silent world. Suddenly, they heard faint, ghostly whispers surrounding them. Jackson and Davis exchanged nervous glances, but pressed on, trying to ignore the unsettling sounds. Default text late in the afternoon, they stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked like it hadn't been inhabited for decades. Wearied and in need of rest, they decided to take shelter there for the night. The cabin was dark and musty, with broken windows and creaking floorboards, but it provided a semblance of safety. As they settled in, they found an old journal on a dusty table. The entries were written by a man who had lived in the cabin many years ago. His writing spoke of strange occurrences in the forest, of shadows that moved on their own, and of an ancient, malevolent presence that haunted the area. As darkness enveloped the forest, the feeling of dread returned with full force. The wind howled through the trees, and the cabin seemed to groan and shudder under its force. Jackson and Davis tried to stay alert, but exhaustion began to take its toll. Around midnight, the temperature plummeted, and a thick, unnatural fog seeped into the cabin through the cracks. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. They could hear footsteps outside, circling the cabin, and occasional knocks on the walls. Jackson and Davis huddled together, clutching their weapons, hearts pounding with fear. Suddenly, a ghostly figure appeared in the doorway, a translucent form of a man dressed in old, tattered clothes. His eyes were hollow, and his face twisted in an expression of anguish. The figure raised a bony finger and pointed directly at them, then let out a mournful wail that echoed through the forest. The apparition spoke in a voice that seemed to come from another world. "Leave this place ... or suffer the same fate as those before you." Terrified, Jackson and Davis tried to reason with the ghost, but it vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The whispers grew louder, and the cabin seemed to close in on them. Shadows moved of their own accord, and the air grew thick with a sense of impending doom. With dawn still hours away, the two soldiers knew they couldn't stay in the cabin any longer. They gathered their gear and fled into the night, the fog swirling around them. As they ran, they could hear the ghostly wails and whispers following them, urging them to leave the forest. They pushed through the dense underbrush, stumbling and falling in their haste. Every so often, they glimpsed shadowy figures moving in the fog, always just out of reach. It felt as if the forest itself was trying to trap them, to keep them from escaping its clutches. Exhausted and on the verge of collapse, they finally reached the second checkpoint, a small clearing with an old, abandoned watchtower. The structure was rickety, but it provided some elevation and a temporary sense of security. They climbed up and huddled together, keeping watch as the first light of dawn began to break. As the sun rose, the fog lifted and the whispers faded away. The forest returned to its seemingly normal state, But the soldiers knew that the darkness they had encountered was still lurking, waiting for the next unwary souls to wander into its domain. Jackson and Davis managed to survive the second night, but they were forever changed by their experiences. The forest had revealed its true, terrifying nature, and they knew they had to report their encounters to their superiors. The patrol was no longer just a mission, it had become a fight for their very souls against the malevolent forces that haunted the northern woods. As they prepared to continue their journey back to base, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The legend of the Wendigo and the other supernatural entities they had encountered would stay with them forever, a haunting reminder of the horrors that lay hidden in the heart of the forest. The Northern Patrol, the third day. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees, Sergeant Jackson and Corporal Davis took a moment to gather themselves at the old watchtower. The events of the previous night weighed heavily on their minds. Despite their exhaustion, they knew they had to press on and reach the next safe point. After a quick meal and some rest, they packed their gear and cautiously descended from the watchtower. The forest, though now bathed in morning light, still held an ominous air. The silence was unnerving, and every rustle of leaves seemed to signal another supernatural encounter. As they moved deeper into the forest, the terrain became more challenging. The underbrush was thick, and the path was barely visible. They followed their compass, trying to stay on course. By midday, they stumbled upon an old, overgrown trail that seemed to lead in the right direction. The trail led them through dense woods, and they noticed strange symbols carved into the trees along the way. These markings were unlike anything they had seen before, adding to the sense of unease. The further they went, the more the forest seemed to close in around them. In the late afternoon, they came across a small, abandoned village. The buildings were in ruins, overgrown with vegetation. It looked as if the village had been deserted for decades. Curious but cautious, Jackson and Davis decided to explore, hoping to find some clues about the strange occurrences in the forest. Inside one of the crumbling houses, they found more old journals and records. The entries spoke of a prosperous community that had suddenly vanished, leaving behind no trace of its inhabitants. The journals mentioned strange rituals and the worship of an ancient forest spirit, believed to protect the village. As nightfall approached, Jackson and Davis decided to set up camp in one of the sturdier buildings. They fortified the entrances and started a small fire to keep warm. The feeling of being watched returned with the darkness, and the oppressive silence of the forest became almost deafening. Around midnight, the temperature dropped sharply, and a thick fog rolled in once more. The whispers returned, more insistent than ever. Shadows moved in the corners of their vision, and the air grew thick with a sense of foreboding. Suddenly, a group of ghostly figures appeared in the village square, performing a silent ritual. They were dressed in tattered, ancient clothing and moved in unison, as if reenacting a long-forgotten ceremony. Jackson and Davis watched in horror as the figures chanted in an unknown language, their faces twisted in anguish. The ritual reached its climax, and the ground began to tremble. A dark, shadowy figure emerged from the center of the circle, a towering entity with glowing red eyes. The air was filled with an overwhelming sense of malevolence, and the soldiers felt an intense pressure bearing down on them. The shadowy figure moved towards the building where Jackson and Davis were hiding. It passed through walls and obstacles as if they didn't exist. The soldiers knew they had to act quickly. Jackson grabbed a silver medallion he had found in the village, a relic mentioned in the journals as a protective talisman. As the entity approached, Jackson held up the medallion, and the figure recoiled, emitting a piercing shriek. The ghostly villagers vanished, and the fog began to lift. The dark entity, however, was not completely banished. It hovered at the edge of the village, its eyes burning with hatred. Knowing they couldn't stay any longer, Jackson and Davis fled the village, the medallion clutched tightly in Jackson's hand. They ran through the forest, guided by the faint light of the moon. The oppressive feeling slowly subsided as they put more distance between themselves and the haunted village. By dawn, they reached a small clearing and collapsed. utterly exhausted. They knew they were still far from safety, but the medallion gave them a glimmer of hope. The forest had shown them its darkest secrets, but they were determined to survive and report what they had encountered. As they rested, Jackson and Davis discussed their next steps. They would continue to the final checkpoint and then make their way back to base. They couldn't shake the feeling that the forest had more in store for them, but they were resolved to face whatever came their way. The legend of the Wendigo and the Dark Forest Spirit would not claim them without a fight. The third day had tested their limits, but it also strengthened their resolve. They knew that their journey through the northern woods was far from over, and the true horror of the forest was yet to be fully revealed. The Northern Patrol, the fourth day. After being airlifted out of the haunted forest, Sergeant Jackson and Corporal Davis were debriefed at the base. Their superiors were both skeptical and alarmed by their accounts of supernatural encounters. Despite the relief of being out of immediate danger, the soldiers couldn't shake off the feeling that their ordeal was far from over. Due to the strategic importance of the northern forest area, the military decided to send a larger, better-equipped team to investigate. Jackson and Davis were asked to join the new team as guides, given their first-hand experience. Reluctantly, they agreed, driven by a sense of duty and a desire for closure. On the fourth day, Jackson and Davis, along with a team of seasoned soldiers, re-entered the forest. This time, they were better prepared with advanced equipment and additional protective measures, including more silver medallions and other items believed to ward off evil spirits. As they moved deeper into the forest, they came across more strange symbols and signs of ancient rituals. The new team set up sensors and cameras to capture any unusual activity. By midday, they found an ancient stone circle that seemed to be the source of the forest's supernatural energy. While examining the stone circle, the team encountered their first sign of trouble. A dense fog rolled in, and the temperature dropped suddenly. Whispers filled the air, and shadowy figures appeared at the edge of the clearing. The soldiers formed a defensive perimeter, their weapons ready. Jackson and Davis, holding their silver medallions, led the charge to banish the spirits. The medallions glowed with a faint light, and the spirits recoiled. However, the shadowy figure from their previous encounter, the one with glowing red eyes, appeared once more, seemingly stronger and more malevolent. The soldiers engaged in a fierce battle with the supernatural entities. Bullets had little effect on the shadowy figure, but the combined power of the medallions and the soldiers' determination managed to drive it back. The encounter left the team shaken, but resolute. As night fell, the team set up camp around the stone circle, believing it to be a focal point of the forest energy. They fortified their position and prepared for another long night. Jackson and Davis shared their knowledge and experiences with the new team, emphasizing the importance of staying together and keeping their wits about them. Around midnight, the ground began to tremble, and the stone circle emitted an eerie glow. A deep guttural echoed through the forest, and a massive, shadowy creature emerged from the darkness. It was unlike anything they had seen before, a grotesque amalgamation of animal and human features. The creature attacked with ferocity, its claws and teeth tearing through the soldiers' defenses. Jackson and Davis, along with the team, fought bravely, using their medallions and whatever weapons they could. The battle was intense, and several soldiers were injured, but they managed to drive the creature back into the darkness. As dawn approached, the supernatural activity began to wane once more. The team, though battered and bruised, remained vigilant. They knew the forest held many more secrets and dangers. They decided to press on to the next checkpoint, hoping to find more clues about the ancient evil that plagued the area. Jackson and Davis, now more determined than ever, took a moment to reflect on their journey. They had faced unimaginable horrors, but they were not alone. The new team had proven their mettle, and together, they would uncover the truth behind the forest's dark legacy. The fourth day had brought new challenges and revelations. The forest was alive with ancient, malevolent forces, but the soldiers were ready to face whatever lay ahead. Their journey was far from over, and the true test of their resolve and courage was yet to come.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of darkness. If you enjoyed this tale, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more chilling stories of the unknown.